happening, Awesemo race fans? Welcome to the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show. I'm Jason Floyd. Wait a minute. I'm Terry McBride. What the hell am I doing here? Strange little bit of a curveball for you guys. First time on a NASCAR show for me. I am something of a basic NASCAR player. So I'm here with Phill. Fortunately, you guys get Phill, your friend, your pal, the guy who knows everything about this sport up and down, talk DFS with us. So I'm excited to be here. I'm going to learn something during this show. I know enough about NASCAR to be dangerous, but I don't know enough to be good at this. And there's so much with NASCAR that just kind of goes into it, from the tracks being different every week to the equipment to all the restrictions and all of that stuff. So Phil's going to take us through all of this stuff. We're brought to you by PrizePicks today. We're also brought to you by Betting You, which is our new sports betting podcast. You guys can check that out. It's Ben Rossa, it's Matt Kajeski. They cover everything college football betting. They take you through every conference, all the best bets on the board week by week. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Check that out. Make sure you subscribe to it so you're getting all the new episodes. That's the reads to start the show. We'll talk a little bit more about PrizePicks, the presenting sponsor, as we get into it. But first, Phill, how you doing, man? How's your weekend going so far?
Oh, fantastic. Things are finally starting to cool down here in Oklahoma. It's starting to finally feel like fall. I mean, I love waking up to the 40s in the morning. So I'm here for it, ready to get summer over and ready for a evening race in Las Vegas for tomorrow, especially compared to how Bristol played out last week, ready to get that off the table and move on to the South Point 400.
Right on. Yeah, it seems like a big race. Now, Emac was telling me, is this the first ever night race in Vegas? Emac mentioned that it might be. I'm not sure if that's accurate. And he, I think, is tuning in to watch us right now. So I'm going to blame him if that's inaccurate.
This is actually the second night race. This is only I believe this is only the fourth time that NASCAR has gone back to Las Vegas for a secondary race. It's always been, we're going to do one race in the spring because of, obviously, it's the desert. We can't do races in the summertime, just be horrible for the fans. It'd be horrible for the racers. They got rid of one race, which used to be at New Hampshire. They moved it here because money talks, and Las Vegas is paying NASCAR somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million plus to have two races here at this track. They initially had this as an afternoon race, and the track was slick. It was miserable for the fans sitting out in 100-degree plus heat for 3-4 hours. So they decided, okay, we're going to make this an evening race. It's going to start at 4 o'clock local time there in Las Vegas. And by the time that the race ends around 7 o'clock, the sun will have basically set. So it's an interesting race to plan for, because the race is going to start off under the heat. We're looking at 90, 91 degrees for tomorrow. The track temperature is probably going to be somewhere around 110, 120. But then by the time that the race concludes, not only is the air temperature going to be cooler, but the track temperature is going to be cooler. It's going to be a lot more grip. So this really will be a tale of two different halves and how teams plan for how the track evolves throughout the day.
And I mean, obviously, that's something that we have to factor in as we're building lineups and as we're considering, dominator versus positioning plays. Do you have a lean one way or the other? I mean, looking at our board, we've got one clear-cut play as a dominator at the top of the board. And then it looks like we've got a lot of guys who are somewhat interesting in terms of their positioning points, but not necessarily pulling in anywhere near the dominator play. And the ownership seems somewhat spread between those guys. So I'm just curious how you see roster construction coming together in a nutshell, and how you see like those track factors playing into it in this race.
Right. With this being 400 miles, there's only 267 laps. And in these typical 267 lap races at these intermediate tracks, it generally boils down to a 2 dominator build. If people have the race sheets, you can find that pinned in the Awesemo NASCAR Slack channel. You can find that up and down my Twitter profile. Check out the race sheets. I've got the last 3 optimals in there. And if you check out these optimals, you will see just how many dominators were exactly optimal for both DraftKings and FanDuel. And if we're looking at this previous spring race, it was a 2 dominator build highlighted by Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin leading the most laps. You go back to this exact race last year, well, it was, what do you know? It was a 2 dominator build just the same. It could have been a 3 dominator build, but the 3rd dominator had some issues late in the race, fell back. So then all of his dominator points were for naught because of lost place differential. So traditionally, this race, these other races with this amount of laps. It's definitely a 2 dominator build. And as you were saying, if people who have access to the top driver tool, if they'll look at that and see our top 2 dominator percentages, I mean, one driver is blowing the field out of the water, and it's the driver that everybody else across the industry is pointing to, saying this is the guy that you need to base your lineups with. However, after that, the top driver tool is having the same issues that I'm seeing with a lot of other analysts across the industry. We really don't know who the best option is for the second dominator. It could be Kyle Busch. It could be Denny Hamlin. It could be Chase Elliott. It could be Martin Truex Jr., Logano, Harvick, Blaney. I mean, just the list goes on. There's really not a lot of certainty this week, which it creates an interesting dynamic, especially in cash, because people are just going to automatically sink right into Kyle Larson as the pillar of their lineups. And then, of course, they're going to build their place differential. But what you do with your second dominator, there's not a lot of agreement across the industry. And if you try to use the top driver tool to say, well, I'm going to use that to narrow it down, well, you're not really going to get a strong lean. So you're really having to base this off of either past Las Vegas numbers, or you're going to numbers in the 550 horsepower aero package. So there are a lot of different ways to go. And I think because there's just so much uncertainty among how people feel about secondary dominators, there really is a leg to have in tournaments this week, because I'm expecting Larson, his ownership to just be bananas. And if you look at our projected ownership, it's right there. But then once you get past that, it's evened out, really. So if you can take a stand on somebody as the secondary dominator and they're the one that hits you, you're probably going to do pretty well tomorrow night.
And is that typically how you would approach a race like this, where we're seeing such a broad field of potential second dominators? Are you looking to just make a choice, or maybe make a couple of choices, kind of zero in on those guys and get a concentrated pool around those guys? And if they don't connect, you're just not going to win this week? Or are you looking to maybe spread out, capture a wide range of outcomes? Maybe you've got a thinner path to victory, but you've got a broad slate of thin paths to victory, if you follow my meaning. So which approach do you typically take there?
Yeah, I think if people were to look at the way that I did my 150 max builds on FanDuel, look at the way I did my 20 max builds on DraftKings, and then look at 3 max and single entry, I took different approaches. When it came to single entry and 3 max, I've got the guy that I think is going to lead the most laps, and spoiler alert, it's who everybody else thinks is going to lead the most laps tomorrow, based on how he's been in this package and what he did previous the spring at Las Vegas. And then I went to for my 3 max, I locked in a second dominator in all 3 lineups, because this is the guy that I'm going to take a chance on. His ownership, it's there, but I really do like the way that he's been trending up. But then when I got to 20 max and 150 max, I mean, it was like a shotgun. Just the grape shot went everywhere. I had one guy that I feel pretty confident in, and then everybody else was me trying to get at minimum 20% ownership, at maximum somewhere around 35 to 40%. Like the God honest truth is, because of the way that this race is going to evolve with the track, that it could play out a bunch of different ways. So I'm just going to try to hit as many of different scenarios as I can with these top potential dominators. And heck, there's even the scenario where you don't even need a second dominator, where Kyle Larson just goes out, because remember, he's on the pole. If he goes out, leads a majority of the laps like he did at the race at Charlotte that night, your worries about a second dominator, it's not gonna matter. So then it's going to be a matter of the guys that you're backfilling the rest of your roster with. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, not nearly what we were dealing with last week at Bristol, but there is levels of uncertainty. So in my 20 max and 150 max, I mean, it was just, I'm going to try to hit as many scenarios as I can, knowing that I can't hit them all, but I'm going to try my best to get these.
Yeah, and particularly, large field tournament play, that's just a theme across DFS, right? That's a foundational DFS concept where we want to cover in most scenarios a wide range of outcomes because you're competing against such a large field. You've got to get to different lineup combinations. You've got to get to different combinations of these drivers, even if you're going with a super chalky play in a guy like Kyle Larson. So guys, you got it straight from the horse's mouth right there. He gave you exactly how to build these lineups. I think that probably warrants a thumbs up. Hit that like button down there. Make sure you're subscribing to the channel so you're getting all of our various updates. Go to the site, check out our free tools and data today, which is the week. Wow. We're giving away the top stacks tool for week 3 NFL. That is unbelievable. That gives you the keys to the kingdom for everything NFL DFS, guys, because we're telling you this is your best quarterback play, and this is what his ownership looks like, and this is what his leverage and his stacks leverage is going to be over the field. That's all you need to know. Fill in the rest of the values and running backs, however they come together from the top projected plays, get a little different with your ownership. We're giving you the keys there on NFL week 3. Top stacks is free this week. MLB top pitchers for Saturday is also free for everybody who's hopefully still playing a little bit of baseball. I spent some time writing my tournament strategy article. I'll be hosting the Live Before Lock later on with Gundacker for that. So check out MLB, hit that like and subscribe before we move on here. Phil, I'm going to knock out another quick read so that we can just talk slate for a little bit here. So everybody out there, if you're enjoying the content, you're enjoying what we're talking about here, you want to gain access to the various tools and content like the top drivers tool that we were just talking about, get access to everything Awesemo Plus behind the scenes for every DFS sport out there. You can get an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. Includes full access to all of our premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, player projections, ownership projections, premium Slack, which is a huge part of the community. It's where everybody hangs out, where guys like me and Phill are hanging out, talking shop and answering questions all day about the various sports. I try not to answer NASCAR questions. It gives you access to the lineup builder, gives you a whole lot more in behind the scenes as well. If you're a new user of Awesemo Plus Platinum, you can take advantage of the promo code we have for this show right now, which is NASCAR Strategy Show, all caps, all one word. That's NASCAR Strategy Show. Get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Of course, if you're looking to play only NASCAR DFS, you can sign up now for our Awesemo Plus NASCAR weekly package for just $9.95. That's a couple of tournament entries, guys. I guarantee you this is going to make your entries better. You're going to win more money for having spent that $10. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Phil, we're going to get into these driver by drivers based on salary. We're going to run down the tier, but we've talked about it. We've ducked and dived around it a little bit. You mentioned his name once, but Kyle Larson is sitting at the top of salary. He's sitting at the top of projections by nearly 20 points on DK. He's sitting at the top of ownership. He's sitting at the top of our top 6 percentage. He's not at the top of the top 4 by positioning, but he's at the top of our top 2 dominators. You mentioned it, by a factor of nearly 3 over these other guys. Is there any path to building a lineup that doesn't include Kyle Larson for this slate? Because that's my first inclination when I see 53% ownership. Just playing DFS from DFS principles is, all right, how can I get different? How can I get away from the field? Does that make any sense for this slate, or do you just kind of have to lock them in and just pick your poison from these other drivers to put with them?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a path to Larson failing. As much as I want to talk about just how well he's done in this 550 horsepower package. Plus, we've got the whole factor of our last 3 races, the first 3 that opened up the playoffs here in the NASCAR Cup Series. They were all afternoon into evening races. One of those tracks, Richmond, did not suit Larson whatsoever. It's just a track that he's not traditionally done that well at. But you had Darlington and you had Bristol, 2 of his stronger tracks. And what happened? He led the most laps last week at Bristol, and then I believe he either led the most or the second most laps going back to Dover. So if you have a strong track, his crew chief is able to game plan for the whole afternoon into evening scheme and get that car set up correctly, and then make the proper adjustments as the race goes on. So there's really no reason to think that they just don't continue that same thing here at Las Vegas, the track that he won at in the spring, led the most laps at. In this 550 horsepower package, he's got 2 wins. He's got the highest driver rating, averaging the most FanDuel points, DraftKings points, has just outstanding dominator point averages. We're talking 48 fastest laps per race, 129.4 laps led per race. Like, he is so far ahead of the field in terms of dominator points. Like, you have to go down to, I believe, you have to find William Byron at 24 laps led per race. There was more than a 100 lap gap in average terms between Larson and himself, just how well he's done. But the thing that you have to realize is he can lead laps, he can get out front, but all it takes is just one bad pit stop at the end, one ill-timed caution, and he can get stuck back in traffic. And if he doesn't have the benefit of clean air, or he's got something else going on, then he can get stuck back there, lose place differential, negating his dominator points, and it won't be such a fantastic night. Case in point, you go back to Kansas. He finished 19th that day. He should have won that race. He would have won that race if it wasn't for a late caution caused by Chris Buescher's errant tire getting off of pit road. But they throw the caution. He has some issues on the initial restart. Kyle Busch wins that race, and he falls back to 19th. If Larson just doesn't totally dominate this race, like let's just say that he leads somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 laps, but then he has one of these issues where he falls back, say loses 10 spots. Maybe he just doesn't have a good setup tomorrow. Like for whatever reason, the setup isn't good. He's going to kill people in their tournament lineups. He's probably going to be so over-owned in cash that it's not going to matter. Like he's just going to be a driver that you play just to block. Even if you don't like Larson for whatever silly reason tomorrow, you're just going to play him in cash just to block other people, because he's going to be so high owned in double ups and head to heads. But in tournaments at this ownership, I mean, nothing is guaranteed. Yes, he's supposed to go out and do well at this race and win. He's the, whatever sports book you're looking at, he's got the highest outright odds to win, but nothing's guaranteed. He could have a bad finish. In fact, in 2 of the last 3 races in this package, he's got finishes of 18th or worse. So, if you are wanting to take that stab, I mean, there's nothing to stop you. Case in point, last night, John Hunter Nemechek, starting on the pole in the Truck Series race, we had him projected at 74% ownership. He was his top 2 dominator percentage. It was kind of like Larson's. It was out of this world. But what happened to Nemechek? He got wrecked. Ended this race, lost 30 plus place differential points. And if you just happen to pivot off of him because of pure ownership, you vaulted yourself above the field. So that's that's the basic take here with Larson, is that 9 out of 10 times he's probably going to crush. He's going to score over 100 DraftKings points tomorrow. He's going to be essential to lineup building. But if for whatever reason something goofy happens and you take a stand against him, even if you just go under the field in terms of ownership, you're probably going to find yourself in a good spot.
Yeah, and that's what brought the question to mind at first, is just looking at that ownership number. Despite the dominant position in the dominator points, he is sitting at a number that's more than the next 3 guys on the board put together in terms of his probability of being a top 2 dominator. So I mean, he is the clear-cut pick for cash, no-brainer lock and load for cash. But just thinking about tournaments, for every reason that you just described, it just kind of makes sense to me to at least consider the undercut and maybe just start spreading those shares out to some of these other guys. So from that 10,000 price tier, I've got Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch, if I'm sorting by dominator points, kind of standing above Chase Elliott. Do you have an opinion between those 3? Which one's your favorite? And then why would you, or how would you rank them? And for what reasons would you put them in that order?
Oh, yeah. This is probably the real decision point for everybody, especially here on DraftKings. You've got Kyle, who's been really, really good in this 550 horsepower package. He's got a couple of wins. He's got a win at Pocono. He's got this win at Kansas. You look at races just at intermediate tracks, the other 1.5-mile tracks. No finish outside of 10th. The last race at a race with a 550 horsepower package, that was Michigan. He finished 7th. He's got 5 top 5s in this package. He's been really, really good. You've got Hamlin, who hasn't been as strong because it appears the 11 teams focus this season has been in the 750 horsepower package, because that's going to be the second and the last race of this season. So it makes sense. Let's focus on those, because that's going to be our path to a championship. Hamlin hasn't been so strong. However, Hamlin's got back-to-back top 5 finishes. And in this race in the spring, Hamlin actually led 47 laps. And then you go to this race last year, and Hamlin led the most laps at 121. So that's good. that's good momentum for him coming into this track. And then you've got the driver that I think a lot of people are just going to go box score hunting. They're going to look at Chase and say, man, these averages, especially his finishes, they're not good. You've got 22nd here in the fall race last season. You got 13th in the spring. You go back to the spring race of 2020, it was a 26th place finish. But for whatever reason, Elliott's been a victim of circumstance. He's been wrecked out. He's had some some odd things that have gone on the track. But the Dominator points are there. He continually finds himself winning stages. It doesn't manifest by the time that you get to the end of the race. Case in point, you look at his average running position over the last 7 races here at Las Vegas, it's 10.1. That's better than Busch. That's better than Hamlin. It's just a little bit worse than Kyle Larson. But then you compare that to his average finish, and it's 20.6. I mean, that's 10 positions worse. So you can see that where he's at traditionally, for the majority of the race, it's not meshing with where he's actually finishing. Mm-hmm. So if people are going to take this approach to Elliott, and if people will look at the ownership, it appears that there is a sizable gap between Hamlin and Elliott, and I'm going to assume it's because of these poor averages. I think you can play Chase as a secondary dominator. I think you can play him in cash. I really do like Chase's prospects. Chase has been pretty good in this 550 horsepower package, and he's got 4 straight top 8 finishes in this package going back to the Kansas race. And for people digging into their own research, the 2 best tracks to compare Las Vegas to are going to be, in my opinion, Kansas and Charlotte. They're kind of low tire wear venues, same similar shape. Charlotte's probably going to be a little bit of a better corollary because that also was an afternoon into an evening race, and in that race, Elliott finished second. He probably had the second best car to Larson, but Larson was just leaps and bounds better than everybody else. So out of these 3, if I were to rank them, I think I'm going to go Elliott, Kyle, then Denny. But quite frankly, they're all kind of in the same neighborhood price wise. And I think that they're all, if you're doing 20 max, especially 150 max, these are, besides Larson, these are probably 3 of the guys that you need to have your most exposure to in terms of a secondary dominator.
And would you say that basically mandatory to have 2 of these 3 guys in your lineup if you are approaching that from the perspective of skipping Kyle Larson for a couple of builds? It's got to be 2 out of these 3 guys in terms of the dominator points. And then to me, it kind of looks like Kyle Busch is interesting because he's also got the positioning point probability. And out of the 3, he's the lowest owned, at least in terms of our projections, because he's the highest price. So you make that positioning pivot for, pay up a little bit, get a little bit different with the ownership. But more to the point, do you need to have 2 of these 3 guys in your lineup if you're leaving Larson out? Or is it just that wide open a board? I can hear it. I mean, it's and
that's the crux of the matter that I've had all week with my research and making lineups is that I can make the case that of all these 10K guys, you have to have 2. I think probably at the very least, you need to have at least 1 of these guys. But quite frankly, as much as I like the prospects of Blaney and Byron and Keselowski, I mean, I don't think you have to go, like slam two of these guys in here. But at the very least, I think that the majority of your lineups here on DraftKings and on FanDuel should have 1 of these 4 guys.
Makes sense. And then is there any consideration to, all right, in those builds where we're maybe skipping over the dominator points with Larson and we're taking a broad range of this level of guys and the $9,000 guys as well with that level plateau of dominator possibilities, is that a point where you're going to say, all right, I'm going to focus in on some of the positioning probabilities to make my decisions, and then maybe a guy like Kurt Busch at 9,500 suddenly factors in? You mentioned Joey Logano at 99, a guy like Blaney at 91 is not really pulling through on the positioning. So does that take a guy like him down as compares to a guy like Kurt Busch, who's a lot lower ranked in the dominator points, if you're looking at those different kind of builds?
Yeah, I think that really just kind of comes down to expectations. Like you said, Kurt, he's not going to offer you dominator points. He found his way to to them last year, but I mean, that was the perfect by hook or by crook situation. He was able to take advantage of some off sequence pitting, was able to stay out, able to hold the lead thanks to clean air, and he ended up winning that race. But in a typical Kurt Busch scenario here at this track, and it's odd because this is supposed to be his hometown track, and traditionally he doesn't run well here. You look at his last seven finishes. He's got his win in the fall race last year, and then he's got a 5th place in the spring race of 2019. But everything else has been 19th or worse. So, like, for whatever reason, he traditionally doesn't run well here. So you're playing Kurt at 9,500 on DraftKings, 9,000 on FanDuel, purely for place differential. Like, I don't even think that you can count in on him on DraftKings for a little bit of fastest laps. It is purely about place differential. So, is he going to score? Let's just say if he's going to have a high end finish, 5th place. Is he going to pick up 15 points? And is that 15 points going to be more dominator points than, say, a Ryan Blaney, a Kevin Harvick, a Logano, or Truex is going to score? What's it going to take for these guys to get to that threshold? Well, if they get to that threshold, it probably means that they're the secondary dominator in this race behind Larson or whoever else from the 10K range. So I don't think if you can get to Kurt in cash, like, I would still hone in on 2 dominators. I wouldn't go 1 dominator and then try to backfill with the rest of place differential. I think that's getting a little too cute. I would still go 2 dominators, but if in DraftKings cash or FanDuel, if you can get up to Kurt, I think that's viable. You may not be able to on DraftKings. That may be forcing it a bit with who your final driver in is gonna be. But in tournaments, I definitely think he is viable. And because of how depressed the salaries are on guys like Blaney, who's run here really well, Byron, who seems to have really picked up a lot of speed lately, Keselowski's another guy that seems to run here really well, pick up dominator points. I think there's definitely a scenario where you can go Larson, then Byron or Blaney or Keselowski plus Kurt Busch, because you're saving $1,000 by not playing Kyle, Denny, Chase, or Logano in that scenario, and that could very well be end up being optimal tomorrow night.
Absolutely. And it looks like, just going by our ownership projections, that you're going to be picking up a decent amount of leverage on the field by leaving some of those guys on the shelf, going to a guy who's still highly projected, has the good positioning points probability in a guy like Kurt Busch, who's 11% owned. That's, to me, those are the advantages I'm looking for DFS wise and leverage wise, and how I enter these things as compared to the slate. And yeah, it looks like on the going back to the dominator rankings, if we sort by that again, it does look like we've got some discounts on some of those higher end drivers. So out of the guys in that like 9,000, the mid to low 9,000s and trending into the 8K range that are sorted underneath the top 3 here, and that's Truex, that's Byron, that's Blaney. Let's throw Harvick into that mix. Out of those guys, how would you rank those? Do you have a favorite out of those guys before we run into in the next 2 minutes? We'll jump into the PrizePicks read.
I really like Blaney this week. In fact, as I've looked at my lineups, I'm pretty sure that tomorrow morning when I wake up, I'm gonna be doing some swapping to get more Blaney into my lineups. Not only do we have him starting on the front row with Larson, so I mean, all it could really take for Blaney to hit is he gets a better restart than Larson, jumps out due to the clean air, and he could very well have a car set up for the daytime, better than the nighttime, whereas Larson could have something set up for later in the evening. I think that's kind of what we've seen in these previous races, is that Larson kind of comes on once the sun goes down. So if this is more of a who's got the better daytime setup, then you could easily see Blaney become an early dominator. Over his last 7 finishes here, he only has 1 finish outside of the top 11. His dominator points haven't been that fantastic, but this is a track that has suited him with his finishes. He's done pretty well at tracks like this throughout the season. He's got the fifth place finish here in the spring. You go to Atlanta. That was a cooler day that had a little bit more grip. He ended up winning that race. And then you go to the most recent race in this package at Michigan. He ended up winning that race as well. So I really like the prospects of Blaney. You're getting a discount on him. And then you've got Truex and Harvick. With these guys, they're kind of a toss-up for me right now. I'm not really that enthused about either of them. Truex has good track history here, but I'm really honing in on how drivers have done in the race-specific package for this track. And you can obviously tell for the 19 team, like their focus has been on the 750 horsepower package setup. Here for the 550 horsepower races, it's, they've got good finishes. They're getting you top 5, top 10 finishes, but the Dominator points are where it's at. And they're through these 7 races with the 550 horsepower package, sans both of the Pocono races, only 9 fastest laps and only 6 laps led. But that's better than what Harvick has been giving you. And I'm expecting people to flock back to Harvick because of how well he did last week at Bristol, nearly won that race. People have been wanting to see Harvick return to his former stature, a dominant driver, a driver who can show up and win at any race. And he just hasn't been there. The speed has not been there, but we finally saw it last week at Bristol. I figured, okay, people are going to see this. They're going to jump back on board. And in an email that I get weekly from BetMGM, they let me know who's getting the highest percentage of bets and tickets and who the book's highest liabilities are. If it isn't Larson, it's Harvick. People have flocked back to Harvick. They want Harvick to be a factor this week, and they're going to completely forget that race last week was a completely different package compared to what we're getting this week. It is not the same package. I'm not expecting Harvick to look like he did last week. I think if you're playing Harvick at 9,300 on DraftKings or 11,500 on FanDuel, you're paying these prices for what's going to probably amount to just another top 5 finish.
And that's always critical with whatever sport we're playing for DFS and whatever site we're playing it on. I mean, when we're talking about ownership and we're talking about finding reasons to, get away from the field, well, it's the same thing when the field is finding a reason to go to a guy, particularly a guy who's super popular and a fan favorite that people just want to get to, like you're saying. It just makes sense to start considering that undercut. And when we're talking about this board of top drivers that are all very similar in terms of their Dominator possibilities, they're all also very similarly owned. So when you start making decisions like that I'm going to get under on this guy, it immediately opens up the possibility to get over on some of the other guys here. So I think that's a great approach to how to look at that. And that's critical info too, where those Vegas bets are coming down. It makes a ton of sense, and that's a great indicator. So a site that we can talk about real quick, guys, before we continue on into the value plays, into the 8,000 and 7,000 and below kind of salary ranges here. Let's talk about PrizePicks for a second, because they're a big sponsor of ours, and they're a site where you don't necessarily have to worry about things like ownership and leverage. What they're doing is a prop-based contest. PrizePicks offers daily prop-based contests. They want to help you get started with a deposit bonus. You won't be dealing with sharks, optimizers, or mass entries. When you get started, you only pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players that are available on the board to go over or under their projected scores. If you correctly pick a 5-player lineup, you can net up to 10x your entry fee. PrizePicks offers games with NBA, MLB, WNBA, NFL, and even esports. And NASCAR, which should be in the NASCAR read. And with these different sports, you can take advantage of their mixed sport entry feature. Just download the app in the App Store or on Google Play today and make your first deposit using promo code Awesemo. Wonder where we got that one, to receive an instant deposit match of up to $100. So that's $100 on your deposit match if you use promo code Awesemo. Not bad. For today's board, I almost read the part where it says in brackets, ask analysts where they like to make picks. Let's make a couple of picks. How about that? I'm going to pull the board up here real quick, Phil, and we're going to make a couple of picks here. So the obvious one to talk about, right? We're looking for those, whether they're going to go over or under this fantasy score. Kyle Larson off the top, the obvious name that everybody's going to be looking at, 37.5. Full 2 points ahead of Kyle Busch, full 2 points ahead of Denny, and much more above the other guys here. Over or under, do we think Kyle Larson's going to get there?
Yeah, and just a side note to people, PrizePicks does factor in laps led points, but it's factored in so little, I don't really understand why it's a part of their scoring metric. To let you know a driver could lead 200 laps tomorrow when it's only 2 bonus points. So it's so inconsequential. You really are here on PrizePicks just worrying about finishing position. So 37.5, that means is Kyle going to finish third place or better tomorrow night? And I do think that, that leaves not a lot of room for error, but I think betting on a top 3 finish from Larson does seem like a good bet.
I like that one. And let's look for one more. I'm going to scroll down the board a little bit here to another guy that we talked about in terms of positioning score, which we were just saying doesn't necessarily matter. So he's going to have some work to do for that finish, is Kurt Busch. He's at a 29.5. What do we think of that?
Right. So you're looking, can Kurt get at least an 11th place finish? His track history says you're either getting a top 5 finish or you're getting a 20th place or worse finish. I'm going to say, look at what he's been doing in the 550 horsepower package of late. It's just 2 races, but he's got the win at Atlanta. And then he's also got another high finish. I believe it was a top 10. If I can find Kurt here. Yeah, it was a 4th place finish at Michigan. So I say, look at the momentum, look and see that they've been improving as the playoffs were coming for this team. So I think we're going to go over as well for Kurt's number tomorrow.
Love it. And just, this is a cool site. I'm going to check this out a little bit more. And that's PrizePicks, everybody. So pull them up. Enter the promo code one more time. It's Awesemo is the promo code. You get a deposit match of up to $100. Pretty solid deal. Phill, let's move on. Let's take a look at some of these value plays, some of the guys that are coming in more the 8,000s kind of a range. When you're looking at these price tiers, are you paying more attention to the dominator possibilities, the positioning the points, or is it kind of just a mix of both and we're taking ownership, of course, into account with these guys? Or is it just kind of who fits in around the core drivers that I want to play from those higher priced guys and who just works as a value in my lineup? What's the main focus when you're choosing between these guys for you?
Yeah, both on DraftKings and FanDuel this week, after I got through with who I wanted as my 2 primary dominators in these lineups, then it goes down to, okay, who out of all of these guys that we would consider value plays, who has the highest place differential / finishing position upside? And the first guy that clicked off to me was Chris Buescher, and Buescher is going to carry a fair amount of ownership tomorrow. If you look at our projections, it looks like it's going to be it's not going to be quite as aggressive as I fear that it is, but perhaps once the industry today and tomorrow talks up enough about Chris Buescher, that ownership will find its way forward. Buescher, he's just been a beacon of consistency here at Las Vegas. If people look at the race sheets, look at his last 7 finishes. I mean, it's just a bunch of finishes in the mid to the high teens. The last 3 finishes here have been finishes of 14th or better. You compare this with how he's done in the 550 horsepower package this season. It's been consistently getting better. You've got top 10 finishes at Kansas and Charlotte. You look back at Homestead, where he surprisingly led a bunch of laps before he ended up fading into 19th position. But I'm expecting another finish somewhere between 10th to 15th for Chris Buescher. And at his salary on DraftKings and FanDuel, I think that makes him just a fantastic play in cash and in tournaments. So once I go on from Buescher, then I start looking, okay, what do I have left remaining over? So, it's okay, how high can I go? How theoretically low can I go? And generally the thing that I like to do, especially on DraftKings, is I'll look down here at this borderline of the 6K and the high 5K drivers and say, okay, what is the lowest that I feel like I can go with a driver that has some sort of theoretical upside? And for me, that ended up landing on a bunch of Chase Briscoe. I don't think people have caught on to this, but Briscoe has picked up a bit of upside especially in this package as the races have gone on. He's a rookie. The team's adjusting from having a different driver compared to last year. It's been definitely a learning season, especially for Stewart-Haas altogether. But he's got finishes of 15th and 11th in his last 2 races here in this package. he is a driver that always did really, really well here at Las Vegas in the Xfinity Series. So I'm expecting Briscoe at this salary, especially for DraftKings at 6K, that he's probably going to pick up another top 15 finish. And comparing how I'm expecting his ownership to shake out versus a driver like Corey LaJoie, who's priced right above him with a bit more place differential, I think that Briscoe is going to be a nice jumping off point, whether we're talking about cash or tournaments.
So we jumped down to those value plays. Now, when we're using those guys as our building blocks to put those lineups together, right? So, and this is kind of where I get myself into trouble when I do play NASCAR, in my not really having much idea what I'm doing and trying to make my DFS reads from just knowing our board here. Typically like 15 minutes before the biggest race of the year, because I'm just a donkey in this in NASCAR when I play, but I'm trying to immediately go down. I'll grab a couple of those guys from the top of the board, like you said, and then I'm immediately jumping to that $7,000 and $6,000 and $5,000 range to say, all right, is there anything worth playing down here? So you just called out a couple of those guys. If I build in a couple of those two guys, your choices there, Chris Buescher and Briscoe. If I'm looking at those guys, then is there room to jump back into like the higher 7,000s around a guy like a Tyler Reddick, the low 8s around a guy like Benedetto or an Austin Dillon, a guy like Eric Almirola, who's coming in around the $7,000 range? We get a little bit of room, hopefully, from that value. Is there enough there to maybe buy our way back for those last positions to that range? Or are we just kind of looking through these values in this race and we're just kind of spending up on a lot of the top drivers?
I think it's really up to what you're wanting to get out of this lineup. If you feel like there's so many points that are going to be scored from your top two dominators, then you probably feel a little bit safer just kind of hitting averages and syncing up with a couple of guys in the high 6Ks, the low 7K ranges, where you're just hoping, get me 5, get me 6, maybe even get me 7 spots, because what these guys do down here is going to be so inconsequential to what the scores that that these high price dominators are going to get, and especially in a race like tomorrow when there's really just not that much certainty around the groupthink about who the secondary or even the third dominator could possibly be. But yeah, there definitely is the scenario where you say, okay, I've got my lowest guy down here. I'm going to try to jump back up into the 7Ks or into the low 8Ks with these guys that are purely tournament options, like a Christopher Bell, like an Alex Bowman, like a Matty D, Austin Dillon, Ross Chastain, Tyler Reddick. Like, these guys are not suited for cash. They are not safe for cash. They have more room to go backwards than they do to have to go forwards. They don't have dominator upside. These are guys that you are playing hoping that they might get some fastest laps, but they are there because you're hoping for a top 5 finish. You are jumping on these guys because theoretically they're going to come in at lower ownership, and hopefully they're going to have such a high ceiling play that they're going to really knock it out of the park and separate you from the rest of these the players in whatever field you're in that are going with, okay, I'm just gonna play the averages here instead of looking for that high end play, because if I go with another expensive 7K option, then that means I'm gonna have to go right back down to this low 6K range and play around with Priest, Corey LaJoie, Michael McDowell, Anthony Alfredo.
Makes sense. Before we move on, I do have to call out a comment that somebody made a little while ago when we started out in our YouTube channel. JJT12 12380, lesson 1: you can't wear a New York Giants hat on the NASCAR show. That's a pretty good line. I had actually thought about that earlier in the day, but my only red hat has a Cuban national team logo on it, so I didn't think that would play well on the NASCAR.
That might have been worse, Terry.
I think so. Well, that was a funny line in the YouTube chat, so I had to mention that one. But taking a look at the ownership on some of those mid-range guys in that low $8,000 to $7,000 range, there's a pool of 4 guys that have relatively low ownership compared to a lot of the dominator plays above them, or a lot of the higher price plays above them, and then a lot of the value plays below them. And that's Chris Bell, that's Tyler Reddick, that's Benedetto, and that's Dillon. Some of those guys I just named a minute ago. But out of those 4 guys, do you have a favorite one of those guys that you would be smashing a little bit more and getting well above the field? Each of those guys, we've got Bell at 7% ownership. Reddick at 8, and then DiBenedetto and Dylan creeping a little bit above 10, but certainly a lot of room to exploit a lack of ownership on those guys if you had a favorite among them. Is there somebody between those guys that you're really looking to smash the field on?
If there's going to be one, it's going to actually end up being the cheapest, and that's Austin Dillon. Like these four drivers, it's represented in the top driver tool. Like their likelihood to be dominators, it's incredibly low. It's just something that you're not expecting unless there's just some weird happenstance that happens with some off-sequence pitch strategy or what have you. And Bell, he's been much better in the 750 horsepower package. Alex Bowman, he's now out of the playoffs, and you could reason with yourself, well, then that kind of increases the chances that he's just going to go out there and try to get a win. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but his other 3 teammates are still in the playoff hunt, so chances are that he's not going to try to go out there and screw things up for his other teammates who are trying to further advance. Matty D, he's an interesting study. People look back at Matt's history. He had back-to-back second place finishes in these races last year, but then he came back down to earth with a 16th place finish in the spring. Matt's a driver that has also been improving. He's been better in this package instead of the 750 horsepower package. You've got 3 top 10 finishes in his last 4 races in this setup. He very well could go out and get you a top 10, but I think that I like Austin Dillon just a little bit better because of track history. Dillon's consistently been a top 13 driver here at this track, and outside of Michigan, where I believe he wrecked out and finished 36th, he's been a top 12 driver in practically every intermediate track race in this season. So I like the long-term form at this track as well as in this package for Dillon. So if I'm going to take a dart on any of these drivers to possibly get a top 5 finish, I think that it's going to be Dillon out of these 4.
And that jibes kind of with what I'm seeing on the top drivers, the top stacks tool here. It kind of makes sense. It's slight, but he does have a little bit of an edge in the positioning there. He's getting a little bit more ownership, but I think at that price, at that ownership level, as compares to some of these other value plays on the board, it kind of makes sense. Maybe you pay up a little bit for a quote unquote value play and consider him there to get away from some of this heavier ownership. So before we chew up the last couple minutes of the show, the last 10 minutes here on some of the extreme value parts on the board, I'm going to talk to you guys about the fantasy football and the odds channels that we've got up and running now. You guys are watching us on the general DFS channel. That's great. It's on YouTube. Everybody's been a subscriber to this one for a long time. If you're not a subscriber to it, well, first click the little thumbs up and give us a little love, and then click the subscribe button on this channel. But more importantly, we've got a fantasy football and a betting channel now up, fantasy football and sports betting. So jump over to those channels when we've got content on there. Make sure you're subscribed on those as well, because we've got stuff going on all the time for season-long fantasy football. We've got stuff all the time going on for sports betting, all these different shows talking about betting opportunities in various sports, leaving money on the table if you're not following along with that content, guys. So click the links in the description of this video. Make sure to turn those notifications on too. We'll be producing sports betting and fantasy football content around the clock, so make sure that you stay up to date with videos from your favorite Awesemo hosts. Can you tell when I'm reading and when I'm talking off the cuff? I can't. Phill, let's move on. Let's jump into some of these things and talk about some of these. Really, there's a couple highly owned plays that I want to get into from the value range, and one of them, I was curious if you'd mention them as you were kind of rattling through some of your choices from the lower end, and I don't think you did unless I missed it, and that's Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who's standing out at a $6,800 salary on DraftKings, but a massive 34% ownership share on our board. That's the highest ownership outside of anybody who's not priced above 10,000. Is he worthwhile there, or is that just way too much public weight on a cheap driver?
It's rather surprising that Stenhouse is picking up that much ownership, especially like in his price range here at 6,800 on DraftKings. I mean, you can go down to Bubba, who is starting just one position worse, and there's a precipitous drop. You can go down to Priest and LaJoy, and there's even more of a drop. You can try to go up to Busher if you had the salary and you hadn't already played him, and there's definitely a drop in ownership. People are flocking to Stenhouse, and as I try to make sense of this, he does have a couple of a top 15 finishes here at Las Vegas. But I think the thing that people are keen in is that he's been basically a top 15 machine in this package for the 4017. He's got a couple of bad finishes. He's got 34th in the Kansas race and then 37th at the second Atlanta race. That was when he got wrecked out by Cody Ware, but everything else has been like 13th, 11th, or 12th. So if you're going to get Stenhouse with basically give him 10 place differential points, that's going to be a good day. But knowing the nature of Stenhouse, I don't think that's worthy of his ownership, and especially with how much higher it is versus the rest of this field. If you're playing cash, Stenhouse is a fantastic play, but perhaps the way that you play this is that you find your way to get under the field against him in tournaments, because quite frankly, yes, he's got a bunch of top 15s to his name, but there's no reason why you can't say the same thing about it happening from Buescher or Suarez, or go down to Bubba Wallace, who are all commanding much less ownership.
Yeah, and it's not like he's set so far apart in salary where you're gaining so much that it makes up ground on that huge ownership number. So yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Cash, first couple of clicks are going to be Kyle Larson and Ricky Stenhouse for the vast majority of people, and that sounds correct. But on a tournament, even if you're making that first click on Larson that we've talked about a lot, and that makes a ton of sense, but you can also potentially get away from, if you're making that second click on Stenhouse, you're just jumping into the pool with a ton of the field. And you're going to be walking down very, very common roster construction. So I think, especially when you're making Larson your first choice there, I think it just makes all the sense in the world to immediately start considering different values just from a DFS perspective here. So I think there's definitely room to consider some of these other guys. You mentioned one of them who kind of stood out to me for being at the same price range, coming in at a decent chunk lower in terms of the overall ownership, but maybe it's not enough of an ownership discount in Bubba Wallace, who's also pulling in a 20% ownership share as compared to Stenhouse's 34%. You've got a few guys between them in terms of salary, in terms of the various points rankings. How are you seeing Bubba Wallace on this slate? Is he viable at that kind of heavy ownership?
I think his Las Vegas numbers aren't going to look good, but that was primarily because he spent the majority of these races driving for the 43 team. It's not going to have the same quality, the same horsepower as what he's in right now for the 23 team. But the thing to look at is the last two races in this package at intermediate tracks, they were both 14th place finishes. You go back to the doubleheader at Pocono, he ran well there. He had a 19th place finish at Michigan, but Michigan being a 2-mile super speedway, it's a little bit of a different beast compared to these intermediate tracks. So once again, there's the thought. What is so different about Bubba Wallace in a better car that he can't get this same place differential, can't get this same top 15 finish that everyone else believes that Ricky Stenhouse can in a worse car? All things equal, car and talent versus the other driver, they probably have X'd each other out, but there's no real reason at these ownership discrepancies why Bubba is that much worse of a play than Ricky Stenhouse.
Makes sense. So is that your natural inclination? All right, if I'm switching from Stenhouse at 68, is Bubba the best pivot at 67, pay 100 less? Or is there consideration to going to a Custer, a Newman for a little bit more, 7,100 for Custer, 75 for Newman, and just shedding all of that ownership? Because you immediately go from a 34% or a 20% ownership play between Stenhouse and Bubba for those prices to Newman at 1%, Custer at 2%. To me, those kind of stand out just for the ownership play, even though you're paying 300 or several hundred more there. It seems worth doing from an ownership perspective to me, but from the NASCAR perspective, from their likelihood of even getting through this race, what are you seeing with those guys?
Yeah, I'm kind of expecting that there's not going to be a lot of lineups out there with just excess salary. Like if you've got at the most $500 left over, then you're probably still looking at your lineup saying, man, what can I do on the bottom in here to kind of shore this up and get a better low end place differential driver. So for that reason, there's probably not a lot of people that are at Ricky Stenhouse trying to find a pivot that can find the extra $500 to Chris Buescher, because the thing I'm expecting is that you've probably already got Buescher in your lineup, so you can't exactly pivot up to him. If you've got the extra 300, Custer offers you definitely more place place differential. He hasn't been fantastic in this package, but he does have a couple of top 20 finishes here in previous races at Las Vegas. So that's something to consider, that Custer could very well end up with a worse finish than Stenhouse, but simply outscore him because of the extra place differential that he has. I think that, like, if you're stuck in the conundrum that I'm expecting a bunch of people to be in, where you can't go up and you're going down, then probably the thing that makes the most sense is going to be going to Bubba. But if you're playing tournaments, it's going to be sketchy and you're going to be sweating it all night. But Eric Jones did manage to race his way from the 20s to a 10th place finish. I mean, this wasn't by hijinks either. He just simply outraced his competition in a worse car and made his way to the front and got a 10th place finish here in the spring race. So starting 16th, I think Jones is going to be a sketchy play for a lot of people, but if he can just kind of hold position throughout the night, and that should be easier in this lower horsepower package. I mean, there's nothing to rule out Jones from hanging on the lead lap all night, and then something later on in the evening happens and he's able to maneuver his way into a top 15 finish, and he outscores everybody in this range because of finishing position points.
And that's a great call. And you're saving a couple bucks there as well. And you're saving a decent amount of ownership, even from Bubba. So I like that call as well. Maybe go to a less expensive guy with a better shot at getting into that top finish, and forego some of those potential placement points on a guy like Custer, who's, again, less ownership, but you're paying more for him. As we get into the final few minutes, it doesn't look like we have it doesn't look like we have a lot of questions on the board. I want to see if there's anything worth talking about, in your opinion, in these guys that are in that low sixes and below range, trending into the 5,000s, the Anthony Alfredos of the world. You had mentioned Chase Briscoe and talked a great deal about him, but a guy like a JJ Yeley drawing a bunch of ownership, or even a Garrett Smithley at 49. Are those guys just drawing ownership as just kind of, I just have to justify a way to get to these more expensive drivers, so let me plug this guy in for salary and no actual point expectation here? Is that what we're seeing, or is there any kind of expectation for some of these bottom end drivers to score some realistic points for you?
Right. I think the only viable reason that you're getting to one of these punt plays is that you are going with a top heavy approach, and you see this as a three dominator build. So let's just say, for example, you just take the top three drivers. You've got Larson, you got Busch, you got Hamlin. That eats up a bunch of salary. It only leaves you 17,600 on DraftKings for your final three spots, which gives you about $5,800 drivers. So your options are either, okay, I'm just going to go with the averages here and jam in a Briscoe, a McDowell, a Haley, or a Yaley, or you just completely go punting with one of these guys down here at the bottom. Let's just say that you just throw in JJ Yaley, who says getting a decent chunk of ownership, and that's based primarily just because of his starting position. Well, then you're looking at $6,100 left over per driver, and you're kind of still in the same conundrum. With these lower horsepower packages, these guys they don't find viability. You need attrition races for these guys to get viability, because they move up the starting grid, they gain place differential, and they make these top heavy builds possible. It's just not kind of the scenario that you're looking at for tomorrow. And there is a word of caution to people that are wanting to play JJ Yaley because he starts dead last. They know the name. He's a driver that's done fairly well in bad equipment this year. Yaley is driving for Carl Long this year. Whatever sponsorship money he was able to throw together, Carl's given him the car to drive in. Carl Long cars this year have they have not been good. They have traditionally been really bad this season, like horrible horsepower, horrible equipment. People remember the Coke 600. David Starr was in one of Carl Long's cars, and NASCAR repeatedly asked him to get off the track because he was too slow. It's a bad situation for JJ Yaley. I think people are going to flock to him because of the name. They're going to assume that he's driving for Rick Ware, but he's not. He's in a bad car, and this could be a play that eats up a lot of people, especially in tournaments.
Solid caution flag to round out the show there. Love it, Phill. Great stuff, man. This was fun. This was educational for me. Hopefully the people out there got it. Everybody out there, hit the like, hit the subscribe, like and subscribe on those other channels that we've got running, the betting one, the fantasy football one. Make sure you stick around for the rest of the day too. We've got 4:30 coming right up. Eitan and EMAC on the live NFL show that's presented by PrizePicks. We've got Greg and Pete later on at 5 o'clock on the MMA live before lock. And then I'm back with Gundacker for MLB live before lock at 6 o'clock. So we've got a ton of content coming. Like, subscribe, hang out with us the rest of the day, gang. We appreciate it.